Hello everyone, my name's Peter and I'm the Dungeon Doctor. Welcome to my first video in a long time. Just to let you know, this first recording session went terribly. I got about 17 minutes into the what turned into an hour and a half recording session, and the audio cut out, which I am blaming on this guy up here. So I think I'm going to have to do another recording session. I'm going to upload what did make it through anyway as a kind of sneak peek as to what my next bit of content is going to be like. Watch it if you like. I'll have some relevant links to what I'm looking at. In fact, let's give you a breakdown. I am comparing the new Monk Unearthed Arcana against my own rewrite of the Monk class, which I call the Warrior class. It makes for an interesting comparison. You'll see my initial thoughts, and actually in the next recording session I'll get into, well, hopefully a much more succinct version of it. I do ramble a bit, so yeah, it's probably in some ways a blessing that this first recording session didn't work. Anyway, go ahead and watch the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the finished version. Have a great day. It's been a while. Hello everyone, my name is Peter, I'm the Dungeon Doctor, and I am back because the latest Unearthed Arcana Playtest 6 has just dropped, or at least it dropped yesterday, and the reason why I'm kind of coming out of, I don't know, hiatus for this is because this is finally the Unearthed Arcana which covers the Monk, and spoiler warnings, I've got thoughts, let's say, on how that went. And, you know, it's probably worth commenting now just why I went on hiatus for quite a while. I've not been resting on my laurels. Rather, I've been pushing ahead with my own redesign of the 5e system. It's been a really big project, actually. A huge one, in fact. I'm actually just on my second revision of a lot of the playtest, a lot of the core classes, as well as a few new classes that will be introduced in that system. And I was going to wait a while before I present those in videos, you know, make sure the full system is complete. However, I thought this would be a good opportunity to give us an introduction to at least what the sort of class redesigns I'm doing, and for that I thought I'd compare it directly against this playtest Monk. I will comment on what's new in the playtest that has been released by WotC, and then I'll compare that directly with what I've been doing, and well, we'll see who comes out on top, really. I know, I'm biased. I do think it's probably mine. Although saying that what's been presented in this Unearthed Arcana isn't exactly a high bar. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the two classes. Okay, so at the top here we have got the Monk class taken from the Unearthed Arcana Playtest 6, and at the bottom we have here my fandom website for a system that's currently going under the codename 7E. I'm playing with a few different names for what the final system is going to be called, but essentially this is intended as a spiritual successor to 5E or 6E, depending on what happens with the naming conventions on the latest edition. And so, you know, I went with the moniker 7E to be going on with. That will change, but for now, let's actually look at the two classes. You'll notice that the class I'm comparing the Monk against is not called Monk, it's actually called Warrior. And that's part of the redesign I've been doing. I've been generalizing the flavor of all the core classes so that, well, partly it's because it will make these classes much less fantasy it'll make these classes much less fantasy specific in how they're built and how they're flavored, so that these classes can be slotted into a range of different fantasies, or rather, you know, different genres. So, for example, a warrior could exist within a sci-fi fantasy. It could exist within a, you know, typical Tolkien-esque high fantasy. It could exist in modern fantasy or historical fantasy. And I think it's probably at this point worth saying one of the names I'm playing with for the name of this system is called Freedom Fantasies, playing on the idea that, we play these games to have the freedom to be who we want to be, and there's many different forms of fantasies, so it's very modular in how it is applied. Right, enough diversions. This is the name of our class. One nice side benefit though, we'll see in the new monk class they try to strip out a lot of the Eastern mysticism of the class, try and move further away from it being the quote-unquote Asian class. I don't think they've gone quite far enough in this regard. There's still a lot of those uncomfortable undertones within this class redesign, and a big part of it is actually they're kind of stuck with the name monk as well, which is very much calling back to the idea of Shaolinist monks, Shaolin monks maybe. I don't know the terminology. However, it kind of really bakes in that Eastern mysticism just with the name and a few of the other things that they put within the class mechanics. At the top of here, we've just got the flavor. I won't cover the flavor because I'm going to focus mainly on the mechanical aspects. But let's just have a quick glance at the tables. Similarly, I'm not going to focus too much on the flavor aspects of my class redesign, otherwise we'll be here all day. But the idea is the warrior very much is still this very much disciplined martial fighter, just like the monk is. However, it draws much more from many different historical cultures. So Spartan warriors of Greece, knights of medieval Europe, martial artists of Eastern cultures, and they also feature heavily in modern day anime, so take a few anime tropes in there as well. So it doesn't remove all of those Eastern aspects, but it's baking in a lot more cultural influences there. All right, I'm going to skip right down to the feature table. So I'm going to zoom out on my feature table a little bit because the scaling's a bit different. And we'll compare them one for one. So first level, the UA gets martial arts, unarmored defense, and weapon mastery. They also get this martial arts die, and they don't get any of what they call discipline points. It's a much better name than spirit points, which I think they were playing with the idea of at one point. The idea of discipline being a resource that you run out of feels a bit weird to me. So let's see what I've got. Well, firstly, I've got what's called level 0. This basically just tells us what the class gets by virtue of them starting at that class. But it includes 3 feet. That's not really a big change from what Wizards of the Coast are doing, in that this 3 feet is just being presented within the archetype or the class as opposed to being introduced at an earlier point in character creation. Got the hit points. Incidentally, the monk has the same hit points of 1d8, whereas the warrior also has a d8. We'll get into why later though. Same strength and dexterity saving throw proficiencies and starting equipment. Does change a bit for warrior. We'll get into that. However, what I get that's a bit different is a ability called finesse. This is a reinterpretation of the martial arts feature. They get a feature called intuitive defense, which is this ability which kind of covers what unarmored defense currently does. However, it has a slightly different working to it. Allows you to still make use of shields, just like the barbarians do. Then with it, we also get unarmed fighting. That's just essentially what martial arts is doing, but putting it as a separate feature. We'll get into why. And they get another feature here introduced at level 1, which is Flurry of Blows. We'll note that they actually start out with one of their points, which I call stamina points in my system, allowing them to use Flurry of Blows from first level, at least once per short rest in any case. And then we have something called a martial die, which is, at least as far as the monk is concerned, equivalent to their martial arts die. However, this martial die is a common theme across the 4 martial classes. They all have a martial die that scales with level, and actually if you do multi-class between different martial classes, this martial die can increase within those multi-classes as well. So it gives them this shared scaling die that they use. And similarly, stamina points is a resource that's used by all the martial classes as well. So the fighter, or in my system the hero, has stamina. The barbarian, which I call the brute, has stamina points, as well as a 4th class called the tactician, which is very much this intelligence based monk roguish fighter type. Looking forward to getting into that. But anyway, stamina's introduced there. Let's see what comes at second level. Second level, martial discipline and unarmored movement. So I looked ahead. Martial discipline is essentially what the key feature was previously. So it covers step of the wind, flurry of blows, patient defense. I don't bake those under one title. I describe them as separate features. So I've got deflect missiles being introduced in level earlier. I'll explain why in a moment. Patient defense being introduced here, step of the wind being introduced there. So those are pretty much flurry of blows and step of the wind, patient defense, all being introduced by second level. And then we get a new feature called Warrior's Discipline, which is a new feature being introduced for warriors compared with monks, which essentially lets you pick your flavor of what your warrior is. Do you want to lean more into this old wuxia style kung fu master type that's able to run up waterfalls and like? Warrior's Discipline lets you pick that, but it also lets you move away from that traditional that D&D-esque interpretation of monk, and actually look at different interpretations of what a warrior might mean in different contexts. They don't get agility at level 2, however. They get agility at level 3, which within the monk class is called unarmored movement. It's a fairly small difference between my version and the monk version. Reason why I was moved to level later is because level 1 and 2 are very, very busy levels for monk, and I needed to justify having that many features all within there. And so that got shifted to where we get our subtype features or subclass features. Third level subclass features. Monk gets deflect missiles at that level, and they let's see, anything else? Nope, nothing else. Only that their discipline points, or in my case stamina points, increases, and I get agility at that level as well. Okay. Next up, 4th level, ability score improvement, slow fall. For our monk, we get ability score improvement. No slow fall there, and that's because that's actually baked into Warrior's Discipline, which is granted at level 2. So I mentioned that you could go for a more wuxia, sort of traditional monk aesthetic with this warrior class. You can, and that's where slow fall comes in. It's a option that you can take by leaning more into that flavor using Warrior's Discipline. So otherwise, that level 4, it's a bit quieter than it was, and I prefer to keep it ability score improvements separated from other features. I don't want, just in terms of the game balance, it feels more right that they're just levels at which that is what you gain and where you get some interesting things. All right. Level 5, extra attack. As per usual, I've called it improved attack in my system. And with Monk, you get Stunning Strike, which has had some changes, I know, in the new Unearthed Arcana. In my version, I get Disabling Strike, which is actually this reinterpretation of Stunning Strike that gives you 3 options. We'll get into what those 3 options are later, but it's helping us move away from a system where Stunning Strike is the only thing you can do with your wisdom and your ki because it's so good. And we look at other ways that we can use a Stunning Strike-like feature. All right, number 6, Empowered Strikes and Subclass feature. I believe that this monk in the Unearthed Arcana uses force damage for theirs. I'm not that fond of the idea of just re-flavoring what the damage is. For number 6, rather than say the damage is magical for purposes of resistance, etc., I just say that this damage ignores immunity and resistance to physical damage and physical piercing and bludgeoning damage, because that feels simpler in terms of what that feature should do. Okay. That's essentially why I call Deadly Precision instead of Empowered Strikes. The idea is that a monk or warrior is so precise in what they're doing that they're able to bypass a lot of those resistances. In addition to subtype features, subclass features. Level 7, Evasion, that's the same. This monk gets heightened metabolism, which is a way to regain ki by just spending a minute to regain it. I understand that most people will say that the monk is very low on ki points, and I will agree. Level 7 is too late to address that in a class like Monk, because at level 7 you are playing with 7 ki points. You're already at this point where you're starting to feel that pinch of being low on ki much less. Heightened metabolism as a feature should be introduced much later if that's how you're going to fix the ki point problem. In my system, I address it differently. The two ways that I address it, the first one is that short rests no longer take an hour to do. They take 10 minutes, which is a common house rule that seems to fix these things quite often. There is another change to short rests in that you can't take more than 2 per day. That way you do cap this benefit that short rests could potentially give if you found some way of constantly being able to take 10 minutes. The idea is you can take up to 2 short rests per long rest, and then you need to take a long rest before you can take any more short rests. So, yep, shorter short rest time. The other thing is, I mentioned before that stamina is this shared idea between the martial classes, and that's got a great advantage in that we can actually produce magic items and spells around the idea of characters regaining their stamina. And that means that we can actually give DMs and players tools for features and items that they can introduce to the game to address games where the amount of stamina that the warrior has isn't enough. And this ultimately comes down to what the adventuring day looks like. In a game where you've got maybe 1 or 2 encounters per day, I think that monks or warriors have enough ki. They're in a good place. It's when you get more towards these long dungeon crawls that things become difficult. And you can't really address both scenarios within a class by saying, you, for example, with heightened metabolism, they're giving extra ki. Well, is that going to be too much ki for most adventuring days, or is it not going to be enough for some adventuring days? The only way I think you can tune that is to actually take it outside of the classes and put in, things like magic items, where, say, you're going into a dungeon, better stock up on 10 stamina potions so that your martial classes can keep going in tough situations. So that's my general attitude towards how we resolve that. That is... Oh, and then they've removed the feature that removes Charmed and Frightened from monks at level 7. We've got that in mine. It's called Resilient Mind, and it changes how ours does this. The warrior instead just gets Wisdom saving throw proficiency at level 7. The idea is that they're actually kind of splitting some of those Diamond Soul features across many levels. So we will see how that pans out as we get into the details later. Ability score improvement for both at this level. Next up is number 9. I've got improved Warrior's Discipline, so you get an additional improvement relating to your Warrior's Discipline, and that's also the level where you get acrobatic movement, this ability to run up waterfalls and along water that monks get. So made sense to